This video is simply a clarification that I wish to make with regard to the comment, the quote that I put at the end of the last video regarding Palestinian apartheid, a video that I made in response to the most ridiculous claim, Israeli apartheid, quote unquote. I don't actually believe that there would be Palestinian apartheid in a Palestinian state free of all Jews, because the very definition of apartheid does not mean a separation of people based on different nationalities with a separate border because they have two separate countries. So no, even a Palestinian government without Jews living in their area of sovereignty would not be an apartheid. It would just be anti-Semitic, anti-historical, and detrimental to the Palestinian people themselves. But it's also, and this is my main point in that video, super hypocritical considering the positions and the claims of the Palestinian leadership and their propaganda against Israel. Considering that Israel has 20% Arab population and they desire to have absolutely no Jewish population. And then they call us apartheid. When the Arab citizens of Israel are granted equal rights. Anyway, yeah, but I mainly wanted to touch on the quote that I put at the end of that video, which stated that most Jews are not opposed to a Palestinian state next to Israel. They're opposed to a Palestinian state in place of Israel, replacing Israel, which happens to be the desire of the majority of Palestinians, unfortunately. But poll after poll has shown that this is the case. There are exceptions in the Palestinian population, and God bless them. They are reasonable and intellectually honest, but the majority, including their leadership, have as their main goal a Palestinian state, which is not just the West Bank and Gaza, but the entirety of the internationally recognized borders of Israel. And you can see this in the emblems of their political organizations. My main goal was to state that just because I provide a quote regarding the beliefs or views or actions of the majority of Jews, that doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with those views. I simply wish to clarify what most Jews believe, what most Jews think, how most Jews act. That does not always coincide, in fact it often does not coincide with my own views. I also would be in favor of a Palestinian state, given certain conditions being met, but considering that those conditions are not met, and considering the mentality of the dominant force among the Palestinian people and their leadership, I think that to encourage a Palestinian state, at least right now, is the most ridiculous and suicidal thing that a Jew could do. It's also ridiculous from an American perspective, from any Western perspective. The only reason that any Western country would have any interest in a Palestinian state is for relations with other Arab and Muslim states, which all comes down to economy. But objectively speaking, it's completely irrational. What other state which openly promotes terrorism would be supported by these Western progressive countries? The Palestinian leadership does not even deny that it supports terrorism. The only way in which the PLO are considered removed from terrorist lists is on the condition that they accept the validity of a Jewish state, only negotiating the particular borders. But as you can see by recent polls and in their own public statements, their views have not changed. Israeli combatants inadvertently killing Gazan citizens due to Gazan militants firing missiles in heavily populated areas and out of schools and hospitals is one thing, and sure, it's debatable. Well, not to me, but it's debatable in the half-brained, politically correct world whether or not, when they're trying to kill you from a certain area and they happen to have a child next to them, whether or not you should kill them. Still, that's one issue. Israel does not have a policy of targeting children, and the only time it happens is in those kinds of scenarios. But in Hamas's mentality, and that of even the moderate Abbas, they intentionally target civilians. Not only Israeli Jewish civilians, but they also target anyone who happens to be around us, whether they're Arabs or non-Jewish Americans or whoever else of any other nationality. In short, that is my view. I'm not in favor of a Palestinian state, at least given the current conditions. I think to do so would not only be antithetical to the best interests of the Jewish people and Western world, but it would also be antithetical to the best interests of the Palestinian population in general, for numerous reasons, but that is another video. All the best. Shalom uvracha.